Traveling between San Francisco and Los Angeles can always feel like a gamble.
The traffic is so far back, we can't even show you the extent of the backup.
It's pretty awful.
It just feels like you're trapped.
This section, whatever's going on here, it's just a Carmageddon.
Now, the CHP is saying there's almost 3,000 cars that are stuck in this.
It has caused a traffic jam for 29 miles.
With so many cars going through this tiny bottleneck, accidents are bound to happen, which grind traffic to a halt. When you're stuck in a delay like this, you may start fantasizing about the high-speed rail that will one day be available. But the price tag seems so high. Is it really a good financial decision when compared with just building more lanes onto the already existing highway? That exact question drove me to look up several historical highway widening projects, how much they cost, and what they accomplished. Then I could figure out if building high-speed rail truly is a waste of money or a sensible investment. Let's get into it. If you enter the Phase 1 terminus locations of Anaheim and San Francisco into your Maps app, then the suggested route is the 5, the 580, and the 80 across the Bay Bridge. So how much would it cost to widen this route to provide the same capacity as the high-speed rail project? That is actually a very complicated question, because the cost of highway construction in a city is very different than the cost in a rural or mountainous area. So let's start by breaking this route into categories. I classified sections as major urban if the freeway had city on both sides, semi-urban if there's only a city on one side, mountainous if there's a steep grade, and rural if there's a green field on both sides. Now, let's determine a cost of 1 lane mile in each of these different categories. Oh, and before you ask, all numbers have been adjusted for inflation to year 2023. A great example of a major urban project was the addition of 2 lanes between the 91 and the 605. This project added 40 lane miles at the cost of $1.888 billion, equivalent to $52.8 million per lane mile. For semi-urban areas, let's use the example of the I-5 North County expansion, which is shaping up to cost $18.7 million per lane mile. To estimate the cost of expanding lanes in mountainous areas, we can refer to the 405 expansion in the Sepulveda Pass, which costs $70.9 million per lane mile. Since getting data on rural lane expansions was difficult, we can use the number from a HERS analysis as reference. Bridge costs can be significantly different from simply widening a freeway, but luckily a portion of the Bay Bridge was recently replaced, so we can just adjust the cost slightly since we will add fewer lanes and assume that we need to do it about 1.5 times to cover the entire stretch of water. Now, how many lanes do we add? Well, the high-speed rail system will be able to transport 7,500 passengers in each direction per hour. Since one freeway lane can move 1,900 cars per hour, which on average have 1.5 passengers each, this makes the train equivalent to 3 freeway lanes in each direction. So, if we combine the cost per lane mile with the categories of the project and account for needing 6 lanes in total, the cost of our freeway expansion comes out at $61 billion. That may sound like good news at first, considering that it's less than the predicted cost of the high-speed rail, which was $94 billion. But this freeway cost is a serious underestimate. Did you notice that none of these projects added more than 2 lanes? That's a big problem, because adding each lane becomes more expensive than the previous lane. Let me explain why. Picture a road next to a mountain slope. Removing 1 lane requires some digging and dispersing, but adding a second lane means 3 times the work, and the third lane, 5 times the work. This holds true for work in the city as well. Let's go back to that stretch of road from our sample project, which had 2 lanes added. Where do we add the next 3 lanes to each direction? Sure, we can fit some into this excessively wide median, but first we'll need to make sure that there's not a good reason for so much median space. Maybe it's to prevent flooding during heavy rain from creating traffic jams. If that's the case, we'll have to spend lots of money upgrading the drainage system. Regardless, all 3 lanes don't fit, which means that the third lane will have to go out here and eat into this neighborhood street. This will limit the ability for the homeowners to access their homes, but I'm sure we can fix that by eliminating on-street parking. And neighborhoods never push back against eliminating parking, do they? Long story short, it's obviously a problem that none of our reference projects added more than 2 lanes. Let's try to fix that. We're currently saying that 2 out of 3 lanes cost $40 billion to build. If we make the second lane cost 3 times as much as the first, then we're really saying that the first lane costs $10 billion, the second lane costs $30 billion, which makes the third lane end up costing $50 billion. Which means that our new total estimate would be $92 billion, which is right smack in the middle of the estimate for how much a high-speed rail would cost. Unfortunately, this number is still wrong, simply because it assumes that adding more lanes truly increases the capacity of the road. And, as the old saying goes, you know what assuming does, right? Let's look at the traffic volumes for several points along the 5 where one of our reference projects took place. Here are the peak hour traffic volumes before the change in 2014 and the new volumes in 2022. Some sections increased due to the new lanes, but the main conflict area, the interchange with the 605, barely moved one bit. Ultimately, all that happened was that you allowed a higher number of cars to squash into this section, but since the number of lanes exit into the 605 stayed the same, it didn't matter. The bottleneck still existed and traffic backed up as a result. Now, I know I'm just some crazy guy on the internet as far as you're concerned, so you may not trust my numbers. But here's a study from USC that found that adding the lanes in the Sepulveda Pass actually led to slower traffic during rush hour 5 years later. It simply doesn't always work. So what do? Add lanes to the off-ramp, build more runways and airport terminals so that people can take the plane instead of driving when it makes sense? I have no idea how to analyze every inch of the freeway, identify each issue area, and turn it into a cost. Luckily, I don't have to. The California High-Speed Rail Authority did its own analysis, which found that creating the same amount of capacity with highways and airports would cost between $122 and $199 billion. After all of my work, I've become willing to believe that that number has real research behind it. So, if you're someone who dreams of seeing high-speed rail in America and wishes that they could help turn that dream into reality, boy, do I have good news for you. H.R. 76 was recently introduced in the House of Representatives, and it will dedicate a massive amount of funds to building high-speed rail all across America. Take this chance to call your representative and tell them that you want them to sponsor this bill. Yes, building high-speed rail truly is less expensive than building freeways and airports. And yes, you can help get this network built.